Good evening, everyone. As I look around, I do not see any new faces, and I refuse to acknowledge Mike as a new face. So I'm not going to go through any introductions or anything. If nobody is any qualms with that. Here we are again with our budget cycle. Everyone, I assume, picked up their books or somehow received them. 3 nights are what we have scheduled. Everyone's had this laid out, I think, since early fall. When we're doing it, we'll come back together for our joint sessions March 16th. So between February 15th and March 16th, our 2 groups need to assemble to look things over before we come to reconciliation. As it stands right now, as you see in the book, the plan is the Orion Theater at the Mount Arrett Middle School. And I think we're really going to be on track to do that this year without an issue. So we'll open, knock on wood. With that, I am going to turn it over to the manager.
Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and start off with a PowerPoint to present, and Mark's going to share it with everyone right now, for those of you that are online. Okay, great. Okay, I'm pleased to present the proposed budget for the period of July 1st, 2022 through June 30th of 2023. There's a typo on your booklet. It said June 20th, so let's let you know I'm not confused. For your consideration, while this budget document contains Topsham's expected share of the county tax levy and MSAD 75 budget, it only includes details for the municipal departments. And we have several department heads here tonight to give their presentations. This budget results in an increase in municipal operations expenditures, mostly due to high inflation utility rates. The town's fiscal year 21 financial audit and report are located on the town's website for your review. To give everyone an idea of what we've been doing, provide background and insight to town operations, personnel, and accomplishments. As Dave said, you have the dates listed, and you go over those dates for you and when town meeting is scheduled. I'll talk about the process. Mark, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, the process of building this budget has been relatively the same over the last few years. It usually begins in mid-December at the department head level. This year, each of the department heads met with town management, finance director Kathy Ricker, early January to review each of the departments to ensure the level of resources requested were appropriate and demonstrated sound financial accountability. Next year, we'll be using the Munis budgeting software to prepare and present the budget. The Excel worksheet presented to you will be replaced by a standard budget report. If the select board prefers, we can adjust and continue with the same format with the booklets. And we'll show you what those look like. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about the town's 21 financial audit. The audit demonstrated that total revenues exceeded total expenses and resulted in a strong net financial position for the year. Increased revenue was due to increases in automobile excise tax collected, state revenue sharing had increased, and the sale of tax acquired properties. Open and vacant positions, contractor scheduling limitations, supply availability, as well as ongoing COVID-19 impacts were factors in decreased utilization of department budgets. And for the second straight year, Topsham experienced increased valuation, a declining tax rate, and a stable net commitment. The following are initiatives in fiscal year 21 and 22 that focus on the principles outlined in a comprehensive plan and executed with guidance from the select board. Service to residents, businesses, and employees. It's our focus to ensure our community prospers, and we take proactive steps to mitigate risk to service and the ability for our town employees to provide service to the community. We've done several things. I think in the last 3 years, we've had our neighborhood meetings where we've heard from the public, the comprehensive plan, the CPA committee has been working with us quite often, and we've been working together to ensure that when we look towards the budget anyways, that we have resources that enable us to do certain things, and we'll go over a few of those in this budget presentation. Communications. Within the last 2 years, the town's website was redesigned to improve organization and dissemination of information to the residents of Topsham. It is ADA compliant and provides online payment options as well. This past year, we've taken out a full-page crier ad as well to get information out to the public with the best means possible at this time. Last year, we increased our paving budget by 85% and continue to invest in culvert replacements that will serve the community for many years. Affordable housing. The town was able to work with Topsham Housing Authority in expanding affordable housing inventory in Topsham. A planned 38-unit housing project and 2 condominiums will welcome additions to our affordable housing inventory. And the town also approved the TIPS district for the housing project, which enabled Topsham Housing Authority to proceed with the project, adding value to Topsham. Solar purchase power agreement. The town of Topsham signed a solar PPA that consists of 2 solar projects. One is in Skowhegan, which was completed in the fall of 2020, and the Naples project was completed this past December. To date, I think as of January, the Skowhegan project alone resulted in savings of approximately $27,000 for that calendar year. Another initiative, renewed focus on strengthening relationships with existing Topsham businesses and assist with connecting them to our residents. This past year, through the Select Board initiative, we were able to hold our first annual Topsham Small Business Expo, where we had several businesses attend right out here in Town Hall for the public to see. We intend to keep that going, and we budget a little bit more in this budget to make it a bigger event this year. Also, through our website, an intern last year created a business directory, which most people here are familiar with, as well as a featured business that we put up every month to show the public, hey, we have new businesses in town if you're not familiar with it. So, and that's all free of charge for any Topsham-based businesses. And like I said earlier, we took a full page out of the crier. We're working with the crier a little bit too, to kind of consolidate all of the ads that have been previously put into the crier in the same section that we have our full page ads. So more of Topsham is kind of concentrated in the area. And TDI has taken an active approach, Topsham Development Incorporated, to start reaching out. They came to the Select Board not too long ago to do a market survey of the Topsham Fair Mall area. So we are trying to invest resources into bringing more commercial tax base into Topsham. And capital maintenance. In the last couple of years, through preventive maintenance contracts, monitoring of our systems, and updating town systems, I think Topsham's preserving what we have, updating what we need, so we don't have any major expenditures in the future. And our systems right now, as far as HVAC, IT infrastructure, communications, and roofing, is all online at this time. Okay, next slide. This year, fiscal year 22, we made great progress on several longstanding goals presented on this slide. Continued to work on important initiatives and adjusted to challenges and uncertainty during the COVID-19 pandemic. Goals include providing amenities consistent with the 2019 comprehensive plan, increasing our investment in road maintenance and reconstruction, professional delivery of first responder services, and keeping our commercial areas and facilities up to date. And this year, hopefully paying down debt service much quicker than we anticipated. Challenges faced in fiscal year 21 have become more prolific in fiscal year 22, with remarkably high interest, or remarkably high inflation rates. As mentioned earlier, we had limited contractor availability and supply and labor shortages, delays in receiving vehicles and equipment, delays in contracted work, and the increased costs and supply shortages in materials and labor continue to impact departmental budgets and deferment of projects. The town's fiscal year 23 budget, this budget here, was built on strong financial foundation established the commitment of administration, department heads, select board, finance committee, and Topsham residents. Expenditures were prioritized based on legal requirements, public safety, public works, infrastructure, vehicles, equipment, and general government, while focusing on improving service to the community. This year, total municipal expenditures, less the increased payments to debt service, increased approximately 3%, mostly due to an extremely high inflation rate, which is greater than 6% right now. It's been hanging at 6% with the CPI, both with the U and the W for the last 3 months. And increasing energy costs. Importantly, this year's budget maintains reinvestments needed in our capital infrastructure, as well as critical investments to support town goals. The following highlight influential factors and capital expenditures in this year's fiscal year 23 proposed budget. Since the beginning of last year, inflation rates have increased to levels not seen in 40 years, as I just stated earlier. Utilities represent a significant growth point in our budget and directly accounts for over 30% of increases in municipal operations. Utilities alone, directly, if you look at utilities as itself, not indirectly through other lines that we have, it's approximately over $140,000 just in utility increases. Sewer rates are expected to remain stable, and the water rates will increase by 15% due to debt service resulting from the construction of the New Brunswick Topsham Water District building and operational cost increases. Natural gas fluctuates with usage and temperature and is expected to increase by 12%. Electricity projected to increase by 14.5%. And this savings includes savings from the solar PPA, the Scout Eagle facility that I mentioned earlier. So any increases already includes those savings. The projected increases in MDOT gas and diesel contract prices are currently $1.67 a gallon for unleaded gasoline and $2.54 a gallon for diesel. They're projected to increase by approximately 130%. The budget will be adjusted, and I'll get back to the Select Board and Finance Committee when MDOT contract prices are released early this spring if we need to make adjustments. This budget also includes a minimum 3% cost of living adjustment, longevity step increases, and several wage adjustments based on market surveys to retain and recruit our employees that provide essential services for the town. As we saw last year, we had to make several adjustments because of not just competition with other municipalities, but competition with the private sector. This spring, collective bargaining negotiations will begin for the 3 unions as their agreements expire this fiscal year. What you'll see throughout the budget is benefits. Benefits either significantly increase or decrease. The reason for that is as we have people leave the positions, we have to budget for maximum benefits for the person coming in, because we could have a single plan going to a family plan, and vice versa. So those large fluctuations you see in wages and benefits, if it's the benefits, that's what you're looking at. Maine Municipal Health Trust has increased rates by 4% for the first half of fiscal year 23, and we're projecting 8% for the second half. If you recall, last year they kept the rates steady with no increase. Next slide. Okay, this highlights for capital. Capital replacement, you're going to see a decrease in capital replacement. With the capital replacement policy that the Select Board set 2 years ago, there's a cap of $500,000. Currently in that account, we have about $230,000. Since we've had that, we've replaced the trim and fascia on these 2 buildings, which are in dire need, and some small expenditures. But I would say probably within next 2 or 3 years, we'll be at cap, and we'll have that money there, and that we have a failure or something that needs to be replaced according to policy. Capital maintenance remains the same at $15,000. IT tech comms, and it includes office equipment and any hardware as well, as $30,000. That's based off of our known equipment to expire or at the end of its shelf life, or for instance, we need copiers to replace the large copiers we have here in the building. So that's with $30,000. This particular line item where we draw from. Paving. Last year, we increased paving to $650,000 from $350,000 the year before. I expect this line to remain the same for another year or 2, and then bump it up to about $800,000 to $850,000. But of course, when we look at this line as well, we have to look to see, what contractor availability we have in the area, the amount of work requirements that Public Works Department has throughout the summer, and there's other variables that we look at too. When Dennis does his presentation, we'll talk a little bit about what's included in the paving budget this year. Assessing, Justin Hennessy's here tonight. He'll be briefing the assessing department. He'll talk a little bit about that. As you can see, we will need a reval in a few years anyways. After talking to Justin, I'll just say it now. We haven't, we don't think we're gonna be able to get somebody to come in with vision within 3 years because they're that busy. So our target goal is $400,000. That's how much it will be, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. And municipal complex camera security system replacement. We've had a security system that's currently in place that doesn't really work anymore. And we'd like to add additional security here in this building as well. And you'll get a brief on this. The total cost to do both buildings is going to be about $25,000. That's one estimate. We'll still go out and get some other estimates and do the typical purchasing policy and procedures through the select board. And a loader for the solid waste facility at $205,000. Okay, what we would like to do this year is propose to create a separate vehicle and equipment capital lines for fire EMS, police, and public works. This is proposed due to price volatility, inflation that we're experiencing right now, supply and demand and delivery schedules. This will also provide flexibility with prioritizing expenditures if actual prices differ greatly from budget estimates. And the purchasing policy of the vehicle and equipment remains unchanged, same process we did before. So they would come to you, this is what we want to spend, it would be in that particular account, and they would still have to go through the process with the select board, you know, to make things happen. For this year, those are a list of items that we'll be looking at.
They're just a big picture, not any particular item. 565,000 for public works. We hope to buy all of this, but we don't know, right? We don't know what prices will come in at. Is the plan, if this is what's presented, is the plan, let's say we can only get 4 out of the 5 items and it comes in at 525 grand, right? 40,000 left over. Is the commitment, is the plan from that, those are the only items we requested? We're not going to come forward and say, hey, we got $40,000 that we didn't get a chance to spend. We'd like to do this instead. So when we see these items, these are the items that are committed to. Is that accurate? Or
That's accurate.
okay.
You know, an option to that would be is, let's just say you had, we use public works for an example. Let's just say you had $40,000 left and you got a $60,000 unit item truck to buy. You'd have to wait for the next budget cycle and make up the difference.
Okay.
If you want to carry that over. You can carry these capital accounts over through select board approval based on what we have as a warrant article that we put in last year.
Yeah. Well, I just want to make sure that's the philosophy, that we are prepared to carry it over, not spend it on something else because we had something.
No, this is what you have to spend.
Okay.
And that's the approval process. It goes through this process. These are the items. When it comes to you to spend out of that account, this is what you get to choose.
Oh, I know, but sometimes we get weak need and we give in.
Right. One of the things that we'd like to do is, as we look forward in our capital plan, we're going to have some fire engines and a ladder truck way down the road that we're going to have to replace. Like to throw money at that each year and create a reserve account, so when we can buy it, we've got the cash to pay for it, not bond it again.
I guess I was thinking that there was going to be a bit of a reserve available to cover the possible increased cost on these vehicles when they show up, because nobody's guaranteeing the price any longer.
Right?
Am I misunderstanding?
No, you're not. That's a possibility here.
Okay.
So ideally, we get everything. This is just the first year we're doing this. You get everything that you asked for within that budget. Prices hold. You can carry that account over with any excess. So you're building up things if you're not using them.
But if all of these come in and they all come in like 5,000 to 10,000 over what we're looking at now.
That would be the priority of the department head, and I kind of listed the priorities up there.
Okay.
So so you just have to go in order. And let's just say you got to a point where let's just say you use fire EMS, for example. I would imagine this being like this. Let's just say the side by side, and let's just say the service truck was too much and your only option left was get the skid unit. You probably have to get the skid unit and wait to get the more expensive items you have money put in that account. There is no reserve account right now that we have this extra, like we do the capital replacement account. But this is an idea of building on it, but with that, you have to have a process, I think. We could create a policy for this, but when you get into fire engines and ladder trucks that are $1 million, $1.5 million, I think it's kind of difficult with the cap on your account. Okay, next slide. Okay, as presented in your booklets, after our fiscal year 21 audit, we had a very healthy fund balance, as I mentioned, some of the factors that we need for that. The fund balance is well over and above the select board fund balance policy of 18%. So when we looked at this, we found out fairly recently that 2 of the 4 bonds we have remaining are callable. And one of them is the big bond that you see up there, which was for the municipal buildings. That we part of Monument Place. So if you look at that top line, that's the big one. This being 24, 25, 26, and of course, which budget is 23 right now anyways. But based on our fund balance, my recommendation is to use that fund balance to pay off fiscal year 26 bond payment, which would be fiscal year 26 at 725,000, and the rest of the Gorham savings bond, which totals out to be a little over $150,000. The interest savings by doing that would be about 66,000. Also included in this would be to bring up Public Works Unit 2 plow truck up to this year, which you already saw in the previous slide. This truck was scheduled to be replaced in fiscal year 24, but as we've seen with the delay in vehicle delivery, you probably won't see it until that year anyways. So that would be my recommendation. Next slide. I put this into this presentation as a consideration. If this consideration is going to be approved and adopted, the budget would have to be adjusted slightly if chosen. And that would be pay off the entire NY Mellon bond this upcoming year. That would depend if the SAD 75 and the county budgets are within our projected estimates with the budget presented to you. If they are, I would highly recommend that we get together and consider this option moving forward. If we did this, the projected interest savings would be about $131,000, but it would bring our fund balance our fund balance down to about 12 to 13%, which prior to 2015 was within the former policy that the select board had adopted. They just moved up to 16.7 to 18 in 2015. So I'd like to at least make the recommendation to consider this if the school budget and the county budgets come within this budget estimate. Next slide. Okay. For this budget, the following factors for revenue are listed there. Interest. Over the past several years, the cash flow has stabilized, and we've taken advantage of having a sufficient cash on hand to cover our expenses and to invest money in CDs. A few years ago, the interest on CDs were pretty high. And of course, these instruments are fully insured, but the interest has decreased since fiscal year 20 is expected to decrease slightly, but stabilizing right now. Homestead reimbursement and Betty, I'm going to let Justin talk to that a little bit. But I was going to say, Justin, if you have anything to add, maybe you can. The value of qualified homestead remains at about $25,000 per state law. Reimbursement of lost revenue by the state remains at 70%. And for estimating purposes, we use the current number of eligible exemptions on file, and we expect the count will change as applications may be submitted until April 1st. Betty reimbursement, business equipment tax exemption is what it stands for. A business may annually apply for exemption of personal property acquired after 2007 for non-retail locations. The state reimburses the town for 50% of the lost revenue. The application process begins in April, but for now, we're using the revenue from fiscal year 21 and 22 as an estimate for the coming year. And Justin, like I said, we'll be able to answer your questions regarding any details behind those two revenues. General revenue sharing last year was $1,292,242, which it's been increasing 2 years prior to that. And it's expected to increase this year. However, we're not going to get the numbers until probably early to mid-spring. But when that happens, those monies will be applied towards the taxes. Excise tax projection has been a moving target over the last 2 years due to COVID uncertainty. This year, we increased projection to better reflect the actual receipts. As of January, we're just over $1 million, so projecting $2 million in excise taxes. As you recall, 2 years ago, we basically projected worst case scenario on excise taxes for the year, so no new cars are going to be bought. Interest rates remained low, a lot of money was flowing, and a lot of cars were bought. We didn't expect that to be no availability this past year in cars, so that's, I would assume, is going to be a significant hit on the town unless the availability becomes as such it makes up for some of the lost sales that we had this year. However, and I think Ed can speak to it if you have any questions, I would just assume that with the increase in MSRP for new vehicles, it might make up for some of that lost revenue that we probably end up seeing here in the next year or so. Prior to fiscal year 2020 budget submission, the Topsham Select Board approved Topsham Public Library's proposal to open the library on Mondays. The library also proposed to reimburse the town $20,000 a year for a period of 3 years for the additional wage and benefit costs to keep the library open on Mondays. Following the 3-year agreement, a review would take place to determine the success and future funding of this initiative, and the library is not including a payment of $20,000 in this budget. So that's something that the board will have to speak to the library about.
So are they, well, speak, but they're not including a payment. Are they still planning on being open Mondays?
I believe so.
Guess we got some stuff to review.
A little bit of a property taxes, I just kind of went over that a little bit, is, it's been looking through the years, and for lien notices, we've gone, this is since 2019, from 127 to 89, and foreclosures 46 to 24. We haven't seen, at least Ed hasn't seen this low number of lien notices since his time here, going back to 2004.
And that's 24 foreclosure notices. We don't ever actually foreclose on 24 properties.
Right. And transport fees or ambulance transports, it's in a slide, received from EMS services remained stable over the last 2 years. There was a little blip, probably about 3 years ago, where we saw maybe $140,000 to $150,000 more than what we're projecting here. But that kind of corrected back to what it was previous to 2 years ago. Next slide. Any questions?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Tom or Kim, if you raise your hand, we can see that and give you a chance to talk if you want. Is that good?
Okay, great. Next.
Derek, I'll go. Give me the idea when the Naples project might come online.
So Naples project started online December 1st of this past year. We just started, I think we got our first invoice a few weeks ago, but we're not going to see really how it shakes out for another 6 months to a year anyways. But it's online and we received our first invoice.
Cool. So I mean, that might
Might help.
result in some savings there, I would think anyway.
Yeah.
Especially if Scott Egan loans for 27 grand. You good?
Can I just ask off that, Matt? What percentage was Skowhegan and what percentage was Naples? Just remind me.
I think Skowhegan was, I have to get the numbers for you, Dave, but I think the Skowhegan was about 60 to.
Okay,
65.
that's what I was thinking. So it could be a nice number. I think. Okay. Thank you.
So I have one other question about, well, we can get to it when we get to administration.
Okay, we're in.
General services.
Okay. I just combined the three departments because it's so small, basically wages and benefits right now. The only highlight right here is what we moved from admin was MMA dues, memberships and pubs to central services. That's basically the town's MMA dues. Each of the departments may have their own smaller dues amounts. For instance, the clerks has a clerks association. Finance may have general finance officers association. Planning may have theirs, but this is the big one. Unfortunately, they don't really give us the estimates, before we come up with the budget. So we're about $200 over from last year. We just paid the bill, so I'm expecting the same amount of an increase this year. So that's what you'll see in central services when you look at our dues. And one note, as of July 1st, we're going to merge the tax department within the finance office or the finance director. So Kathy will be essentially the point person for all finances in the building. Next slide.
I do have one question under, I know I'm dead set against giving us a raise, but why do we go backwards?
It was estimated on a 53-week period last year.
Oh, because, yep, gotcha.
So I kind of wish you would have, went on with the 3% COLA.
No, and I'm fine with where, I just didn't want to go backward. I believe I'm worth every penny.
Essential services, here's just the variance of central services. You go to page 4 in the booklet. Prior to the meeting, I sent out an email and I also have printouts if you don't have it, some small changes. I'll hit the slide first. For advertising, you're going to see a big increase in that line, primarily because we took out the full page ad in the crier every month. So that cost is about $500, a little over $500 a month, and that's about 60% of what we would pay normally if we were just a normal company or agency going out for an ad.
Is there a measure on that return or that?
We just started it maybe 4 months ago. We have had a lot of positive feedback.
A measure.
I know Pam has kind of taken on most of that for us. The departments will submit. I think we're still working to get filler and to get important things onto the site. But what Pam has done is created QR codes for each of these ads, so people can use that technology, and it brings them right to our website, right where the information is. So that's been helpful. Some positive feedback there.
I got a question on license and leases. Is that increase reflecting the new software system that we're?
So did you get to change that? Okay, so in central services, you go to, again, page 4 under leases and licenses.
Yeah.
The object is 504050.
Yep.
If you could change that number 192,250 to 189,250. And some of those agreements, they increased in cost. More of inflationary pressures. For instance, we use Turf Doctor, for not only pest control, but for our lawns and they had to go up. We went out and looked at other companies that was going up for the chemicals that they're purchasing. That's just one small example. Also included in this, however, assessing software has gone up as well for the maintenance and the agreement. So all the increases that you're seeing are primarily increases. The one difference in of about $3,000 is we now have a PM agreement with Train. So we have Titan that does the mechanical part of our HVAC systems. Train does all of this software. So with this, not only do they do their own PM, but we get automatic updates when they come. And we've come across some major issues that cost us a whole lot more than that. So that was about a $3,000 increase.
And they also replaced some of Mr. Labby's expertise. It's 'cause when Mike was here, Mike had a lot more because of his technical skills, a lot more ability to do things with the system. We would cause more issues than we solve if we try to do Mike's level. So we're proposed to use Train to use their expertise to maintain the system better. They'll come in periodically, check it out, make sure the settings.
One more question on that. You had mentioned purchasing a new printer or copy machine this year. Have we ever thought about renting one?
We're looking at that right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do we lease or do we buy is the question. I
Right.
know I talked to Brunswick, for instance, they're an easy person to, an easy agency to ask,
Not easy to talk to.
but they can ask. What they have found, leasing was not the way to go. We're still gonna investigate it, but they decided to buy theirs. So we're gonna do it.
I think the only positive there is that sometimes you get a maintenance package. If you lease it, like if it breaks, they'll come and fix it as opposed to having to wait for someone to come fix it or someone in the office attempting to fix it. I really think that's the only,
We would still have a service which is already built into this budget anyways, to have people come out and take a look at it, repair it, and for toner especially, come out and replace the toner cartridge. Or give us a discounted rate.
cool.
Paper usage.
Our paper usage right now has gone down, as I'm looking at those supply lines, that's why we didn't really increase it. Specifically for paper, we have been printing a lot less. Probably saved a lot of money in those old finance books that you used to get before the budget.
Listen, I'll be the only one to say it, but.
So the advertising line, of course, we get the crier, public leaving notices and job ads, as well as the full page, which we can incorporate a lot of the old advertising we have from different departments into this crier ad to fulfill the newspaper ad requirements. Some stuff we can't do because the crier is only once a month. It has to be a little bit more timely, so we still have to do Times Record and maybe the Press Herald. Dues, memberships, and pubs. This is the line that I said moved from admin to this particular department. Professional development. The one thing that's really good here is to make sure all of our people are trained up. Personal growth leads to better customer service. We'd like to continue with that. Took a small decrease because we're still kind of coming out of, we haven't been utilizing this budget because of COVID. I would hope that this year we're going to start using those lines more and getting our people up to training and keeping up with their particular roles.
It didn't go up this year? It was 95.
We went down a little bit. It took some admin under our professional development.
Yeah, I'm just looking at, was it page 1 where it used to be? 503020, and it was 9250, and then 9602. And this year, 10,200.
Yeah, he said it went up 200 more than they anticipated, so they added that same amount to this one. So you would see a $400 difference.
Gotcha, okay.
Last year was missing.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, professional development went down a little bit. You can see some savings this year there. Education tuition reimbursement. Within each of our contracts and personnel policy, and it's a great benefit to employees, especially those that want to come here and they see this benefit where we pay a portion of their tuition. What we do each budget cycle is ask each of the department heads if they have anybody on their staff that would like to go to school or take classes, and that's how we budget. We had two people, one proceeded with a master's last year, that's why you see the $8,000. Took a few classes, actually used it. We had another person that left the town that was budgeted to use it. And we had one person that just couldn't use it, but it's there for people that want to use it. This year, we only had 2 people that were interested in taking some classes next year. It's really kind of hard because they almost have to plan up to 18 months out if they want to go to school. So that's what we budgeted for this year. Leases and licenses. We touched on that already. And the last thing I have is a change that I submitted today under phone internet. would be the very last line in central services. If you could increase that amount to 13,500. What was not included in that, that was just the phone, we signed a new phone agreement, but what was not included in that was our Comcast and internet. So I had to add that in.
And we don't get it for free here?
No, and speaking of that, our Comcast agreement expires in the fall. It's a 10-year agreement. So we're gonna be looking at that in the next few months. And I've already contacted them to talk about what we can and can't do.
There isn't any other supplier.
I was just gonna say.
And that's not internet though, that's just cable,
Right.
TV. Yeah. Okay, next slide.
But that does bring up the question is, do we have the ability at that point in time to ask somebody else to come in besides Comcast?
The answer is no for cable TV. They don't give you really an option. It's all going to streaming anyways. The number of subscribers here in Topsham has decreased significantly. What they offer us is, no matter what they offer us, whether it be a return based on who's using cable, or they give us some sort of capital account like they did 10 years ago to outfit our studio, it gets passed off to the subscribers in town. So, some towns may take advantage of that, but I don't think we will. And they stay away from the internet part of it because they know this. It's all cable TV. And they really can't control it too. One of the questions that was brought up is, hey, can we a la carte our channels when we sign up for cable? I just want this show, or this channel, or network. And the answer is no, because Comcast has no control over that. It's the programs that sign deals with that. So I can tell you a whole lot more probably in the fall.
Streaming's gonna run it to you anyways too. Doesn't matter where you go, you're gonna get taken.
Any other questions with central services? No? Okay.
Just for the internet.
Fine. How much are you?
83 now.
Well, that's good, 'cause I'm like 104.
Do you have cable though?
No,
Wow.
yeah, so stop when you read. Yeah, I was coming from Oakley and cost more than.
Okay, next up is Linda Dumont, town clerk and GA.
Hello.
We'll sign them, Marie.
Pardon?
We'll sign them, Marie.
I'm not reading that. What page is that?
I don't know.
You want to use your big girl voice so that I'll
Don't
pretend you're yelling at your
That's
kids.
nice.
No, I think it's only.
Okay, so challenges. Our biggest challenge right now, of course, is managing the increase in absentee voting. It's pretty heavy. And the other challenge is conducting elections during the ongoing pandemic. It's been quite a challenge as well. Voters really like the convenience of absentee balloting because they can request ballots in a variety of ways. And they can be dropped off at any time in our secure drop box. We use this room here as the designated room for absentee voting for the month before each election. We have a separate entrance, phone line, and staff, and the lines aren't usually too long. Voters seem to be pretty pleased with how we manage this, and we continue to streamline it with each election. But with that being said, it does increase our budget for the need for additional staffing. Depending on how a ballot's requested, it would take anywhere from 3 to 15 minutes to process. For a large election, in addition to my staff, myself and Tyler, we need at least 2 more people to manage the volume of ballots. It's especially difficult in the tax office during the month of October, having one person absent for the entire month. I do take advantage of volunteers to help with some of the tasks, but we really need trained staff to enter all the information into the computer to make sure we're very accurate. So overall, absentee voting is very convenient for the voters, but it's pretty time consuming for us, and it's getting pretty expensive for the towns. Moving our polling location, the gymnasium at the non-Art High School has been really great. The spacing is really nice. It's easy to get to, plenty of parking. And the design makes it much easier for us to set up. So that's been a great move. And with election workers, we've lost a few over the last year, and we continue to recruit new ones. We have, I believe, 8 new workers and several volunteers. And as you can see on the slide, absentee voting over the last 5 years continues to go up.
Would ask a question and then duck under the table, because I know it's a sensitive topic. $1,000 to the fairgrounds, still in this budget. We're not looking at holding town meeting in 2023 there. We're not using it for any elections. Why would we still have a contribution to the fairground?
Well, in case we have to have a special town meeting and we can't use the Orion or the school at all, we have to have a backup place.
So this may not be utilized.
It may not
That's
be
just-
utilized, it's just there in case we have to.
So that's utilizing the fairgrounds inside that building with the capacity to carry the limited number of people, rather than choose another date with the schools. We still want to carry $1,000.
I think what the other piece of this is not just the backup plan for that, but holding the drive-in movie, I mean, sorry, drive-in town meeting that we've had the last 2 years. We're not, I'm pretty sure that we're gonna be able to use the line, but we can't dictate to the school their policies are coming into the building. And so I think for this year, we decided, well, just leave it in there for that.
Well,
reason.
this is 2023's town,
It
not
is.
2022.
It is.
It's up to full of cars right now and starts in October. I mean, Leon just started renting it out for car storage. So I'm not really sure how helpful that would be in November if we had to use that place.
The question and with Dave too, I have written that down because
It would be more for May, not, Town, it would be more for May town meeting.
it would be for May town meeting.
If we have.
Outside,
If
is
we
what
have to do
you're
it
saying?
outside.
I'm all in favor of being cautious and making sure we've got our bases covered, and if it's only $1,000, I think that's well worth putting it in there.
It's $1,000 tax to the people under general government, which is about a $3 or $4 million item on the town meeting warrant. So to find $1,000 isn't difficult. The amount of other things that we don't spend money on as evident in our audits every year.
But in terms of the percentage of the total budget, it's pretty minuscule.
Well, every single item in here is a couple pennies built on top of one another to get to a $29 million budget between us, the county, and the schools. Everything starts with a 3. This is only going to raise you 3 cents. That's the argument everyone makes, and that's how we got to $29 million. Is because this is only going to raise you 3 cents per thousand. So that's my take. So I know it's a minuscule amount, but it's $1,000 taken from somebody's pocket that doesn't need to have it taken from. For the safety when it's built within a $3 million item on the warrant. Where we carry every year, we have an extra $1 million that we're carrying over, and then we have excess money for the last several years. I mean, I think there's, and that might as well set a tone. There needs to be some tightening and taking a little bit of risk that we're not carrying this ridiculous amount of money every year after year after year, in my opinion. Because this is just taking it from people that don't need to have it taken from.
The only thing I'll say is departments have been underutilized for the reasons that we keep talking about with COVID. It's not just COVID, but there's a lot of other reasons. We've been very responsible financially with our expenditures. If anything, that's one thing that we did spend money on that we needed the last 2 years. So We can take it out. But I think this is,
No, you don't take it out until we're done with our
Right.
discussion, but
right, but we can make do, but this is one thing that we have spent money on the last few years.
Well, the only comment I have, I'm kind of, I questioned that $1,000 still being in, and I'm on like this with it. But the election budget is being forced on us every year by the state, higher and higher and higher, as Linda commented, and having more people. And these are mandates by the state. So my question is, with all the money that the state of Maine has and has been given, and the imposed election laws, is there any opportunity for grants for election?
I don't know. I took advantage of the one we had, 2020.
I know you did, and that was a good job, but
They don't come up that often that I'm aware of. That's the only one that I'm aware of at this point.
I think we should ask because of all the pressure that's being putting on everybody for absentee ballots, and I don't fight over absentee ballots, but with more and more, when I was on the advisory committee for the election department, they just don't get it, and it's more and more burdensome to the town. And if you look at the election budget, look how much it's gone up. It's just getting, and like Dave said, it's after a while, where does it end? You know, so that's my only, and I think you do a good job. Linda, so it's not
I
about
agree with
you
you,
or
but
it's about money.
Yeah, it's not, there are things that you can't control. though, when
It is
comes to
really tough.
elections.
You know, last year, one of our positions in tax clerk office from part-time to full-time. And what we're finding is during these elections, we're losing a person for a month, as mentioned earlier. And it does cause a lot of stress. And because if you have somebody out sick, in the midst of COVID, they're out sick, or, there's lack of vacation time. Some people may go out in a medical emergency and not have anybody to fill in. So it's all of that. And so you almost have to prepare for an increase that you're seeing every year is absentee ballots until maybe people don't start showing up in person to vote anymore. I mean, that's what we've seen, that kind of increase each of the last 3 years.
what is your feedback mechanism in the state of, like your group, the rest, clerks association, are they working on something like this?
Yeah,
all the time?
they're all the time, but the laws keep changing. Absentee balloting is being pushed from every direction.
It is. That go on down. Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of good benefits to it, but it's very time consuming for staff.
Yeah.
There's so much that goes on behind the scenes that people don't realize that it's very time consuming. And you have to have trained staff to make sure things go in correctly and it's accurate. And when we do the absentee box outside, you have to have 2 people. So on the weekends I come in and I either have to go get somebody from the fire department to help me, or I have to have another staff come in. And we have to do it twice a day. So there's a lot of things people don't realize are, time consuming and costly.
It is, and this doesn't even count possibly comp time and stuff, because there is so much time spent here.
Yeah.
And it has to be worked on at the state
Yeah,
level, I
absolutely.
feel.
Absolutely.
Local, we only can do, but if the Clerks Association keeps fighting and stuff, I don't mind making 2 calls, it don't make any difference. But
I'd be happy to have you make some calls.
I just think it's getting way out of hand, but I think voting should be an absolute right too, so
Well, it's
But I
increasing,
think
so it's gonna
it's-
be more. It's gonna continue to be more.
it is.
Does the second person that has to be with you, does that have to be a town employee? Can it be a volunteer? I mean, is there special?
Well, the only people that I use as volunteers are employees of the town. Next door, I'll just call them, I'll call them ahead and say, can you come help me empty the box? Because we have to have a witness. So it doesn't really have to be a town employee, it needs to be a witness. So, and then we have a log that we have to fill out, and I mean, it's kind of, well, and it's coordinating when you can get here, I come when I get a chance on the weekends, get somebody else to come at the same time, it's easy for me to just call the guys next door and they will come. So as far as expenditures, you can see it's all based on next big election coming up. The payrolls increased because minimum wages increased. the extra staffing that we're gonna need, and, preparing the ballots. At the last major election, we had almost 5,000 absentee ballots. And like I said, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that, we spend 2 days just processing them before the election. That takes, 8 staff, 8 hours a day. There's a lot. And then the additional staffing to cover in this room, even though Tyler and I are in here ourselves, we still have to have other people that are trained. And we do have a lot of volunteers, but there's only certain things they can do. Advertising, that covers the cost of, we moved the printing from the warrant from professional service line to the advertising line, so you'll see an increase in that.
Kim has a question.
I think at this point, you can hear me, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a question any longer because I think between Ruth and Linda and Derek, they've kind of all talked about it, because that was the thing that I was going to mention, that, between the national, state level, even the candidates are all promoting absentee ballots. This is just gonna, the cost is probably gonna increase, and, it's probably the trend is going in that way, and maybe we ought to start thinking more creatively, like what Ruth said, is the state doing anything to help these local communities, decrease or help their costs a little bit more. So that was just it.
I just have one other comment, I promise. So I just want to ask what the state, on the state level with the Clerks Association, I know they push for it because I'm in touch with still some of the clerks too, other than you. Early voting. Early voting is not absentee voting. You would have the machines that set up and touch the ballot twice instead of 8 times. And why the state won't promote this? It was because you couldn't retrieve your ballot and get another one. Well, that hasn't existed for the last 10 years.
That would be great. It would save a lot of time. And
So I
it'd be
think we
very
need to
secure.
push our reps for that and the Secretary of State, because it could be set up in here, the time it would save, and there's ways to secure that box so it can't be tampered with. Absentee ballots is the biggest risk of a voter.
Linda, can you go over the advertising again, why the increase?
Because the printing of the town meeting warrant was in professional services last year,
Mhm.
and we moved it into the advertising to keep all the advertising together.
Okay,
And that also includes everything to do with elections and town meetings, notices of elections, nomination papers, public hearings, updating our banners that we purchased for every election.
There is one thing under professional services as well, that's included in here as a measure, just in case we have to do an outdoor town meeting, is the tech, the leasing of the tech equipment, the porta potties, and those other things that we have to do at the town meeting. Those are professional services.
I think that's it.
So if we get away from that, you'll see that line either declining or be reallocated to lines of absentee ballot. So there's a little bit built in the professional services. One more time, any of that, we have to do an outside meeting.
how much?
About 3,300.
About 3,300 for the tech equipment and a couple $100 for porta potties.
And under professional services, that also includes programming all of our memory sticks. We have 4 voting machines, we have the accessible voting machine, and now we also have the accessible online absentee ballot that's new. Leasing machines, we still lease 2, we still own, and we own 2 machines. Leasing 2. And under supplies, that's going to increase just because everything is increasing in price. And when we do all the extra ballots, we have to buy markers, glue sticks, just all kinds of
It
things.
includes the banners that we put up in front of town hall.
Labels, all the labels for the Dymo labels. So that's more contributed to absentee balloting. Printing ballots, that's based on 70% of voters. We expect pretty good turnout for this election.
Linda, is that the state percentage recommendation?
That's what it normally is.
Right, that's why
But
I was
I'm thinking it
asking
might be
that.
70 or 80% this time.
Sometimes
That's on a regular election. A
they
normal
used
election.
to do that and they go about 15% over.
Yeah, well, last year,
Yeah.
in 2020, they underestimated, so we had to come in and make that.
Right. Right.
So I'd rather purchase extra to make sure we're covered.
And the labels that you use on the absentee ballot returns and stuff, the state isn't supplying those now?
No, they never did. For the, to print. We used to handwrite everything, remember?
I do.
Well, now we print them on that on labels,
Yep.
so that saves some time. There's no way that we can hand print everything anymore. So
Thank
that's pretty much it on that budget. Any questions? And general assistance, not a lot of, no major changes in this budget at all. As last year, the applicants I see has gone down. I've seen 13, I've taken 13 applications since July. Although I do receive numerous calls every week, and it's usually for people that are homeless looking for housing. There is no shelter available in the area, availability, so I send people to Lewiston when we can. People are always looking, and we just don't have a lot of housing. Hopefully with Topsham Housing Authority increasing some of that will help. So the only thing that I've really increased was our dues went up $10. It was 30, now it's 40. Derek is going to speak to the phone piece.
We have several phones here in town. Codes being one, members being the other, that they were operating on 3G. That's, I think, you can just upgrade. So we're looking at
Kind
probably
of.
4 or 5G. So the numbers you see in there are reflect that change. We're working with AT&T right now to get some rates.
The only increase I have is in rentals. I increased it $1,000, only because landlords are increasing rents all the time because they can. I didn't, we haven't used much of it, but I have to have it there in case it's needed. The heating fund, we still have quite a bit there. In the last 2 months, I've spent $1,000 out of that. That's about it. It's really nothing's changed. Very quiet in GA. Which is a good thing. There's a lot of resources out there. I haven't done much with rentals because Maine State Housing is still doing the 3 months of rental assistance for people. So that's helped a lot. Fuel assistance, there's a lot of increase in that, so I don't really spend a lot of money on heating. There's a lot of resources out in the community right now.
So this is a conversation at our house last night. Heating assistance. We've all seen the delivery fees of our electricity go through the roof. And those that are now relying on heat pumps as their heating source. We've put several in, and it really drives your electric bill. So that have you thought of preparing any heating assistance? Could it actually be utilized under their CMP bill, or whoever they buy their electricity from? Because that is their heat. And with CMP going up, from 6 cents per kilowatt to 11 cents a kilowatt, that's just something to think
Our
about.
emergency fund or?
Just in general, particularly if someone came in and said, I have a need, and my heat is through a heat pump.
We would cover it. because
Right,
it's-
but that's what I was wondering, if
Yeah.
you've given thought to that, because it's one of those, I don't know if different state organizations look at that also.
Line heat provides electricity benefit.
Okay,
It's called, there's line heat and then there's ELP, which is the electricity.
okay,
That's been in place for a long time.
because back then it was electric heat, now it's the other form of electric heat.
It's environmentally good.
Right. They go out there and burn them.
Anything else? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Derek, we haven't had these slides sent to us at all, right?
No,
We will.
active.
I don't care if you send the ones each night. So
Like I said, it's just, it's 25 meg.
Yeah.
I'll put it on the website.
Okay. The big books have. it.
Good evening, everyone. So Department 5, clerk and tax, we have 2 slides. The first slide covers staffing and expenditures. So it starts by listing the staff and departments, which is unchanged from last year. And there aren't many expenditure lines. The only one that changed is the lien costs. As Derek covered in the intro, lien filings are significantly down. But that was largely offset by back-to-back increases in postal rates the last 2 years. They didn't go up this year, so that's maybe promising next year. This particular one would cover the discharge of the 2021 liens and the filing of the 2022 liens in the 22-23 budget, yes. So we know those numbers. It's just a matter of when they get paid off. And file. And the second slide covers revenues. And again, you see at the top there, they've been going steadily up even through the pandemic at the same rate they were before, up until now. With lower lien filings come healthy collections on property taxes, and we're actually ahead of where we've been historically at this time of year. So again, expect low lien filings for this tax year. The miscellaneous revenue lines, all the little ones, are largely population driven. You're going to have similar numbers of birth certificates, et cetera, each year unless you have a major population change. So those remain constant unless we do have a population change or change fees, which we have not. And then auto excise, as Derek also touched on, was up to 2.2, pushing 2.3 million the last fiscal year we completed. But we're only budgeting for 2 million this year because of the factors he referenced. And as you can see, the last 5-month stretch there at the end of last year was the first consistent decline or wobble in excise tax we've seen since the 08-09 bubble years. Side note though, January we were up 4% for the month. So you can't tell for sure, but you got to be, cautious within reason. And then you can strike the last line because we decided to table that for another year. So that budget line just goes back to last year's level because that again, excise tax will wobble with the economy, but the number of cars on the road doesn't. So that one stays about the same from year to year.
Just to jump in this a little bit, one change on page 2 of the revenues. Audit agent fees. We just had 30,000 as a placeholder. The second to last line, at the very end. If you could put 24,000 in that block. Auto agent fees, 24,000.
Have some couple questions.
Mhm.
Birth certificates, death certificates, and marriage certificates. And you're saying those are up in volume? Do we have that breakdown? Do we have a 3-year breakdown?
It was the 3 years are on there. No, they were on the spreadsheet. We can definitely get that, yeah.
The reason I'm asking is I wonder how much does the buy-in from the state of vital records versus the town?
And most people are nearly all are still coming to the town. The state charges a higher rate and the town is more convenient. And especially things like the marriages, they have to come through us.
Right.
And the death certificates, the funeral homes all still go through the town, so it is online. But we still do the work, it's just the matter of, the method of the work has changed.
The other question is, revenues, we still collecting notary fees.
Yes,
And I do have a question on full-time payroll, $11,115.24 increase.
6%.
So, Jackie?
I'm sorry, what?
Listen, Amanda.
No, I didn't have any.
Okay.
Not volunteering for anything.
Want to make sure. Keep that line in there.
All right.
Oh, I know,
What was the question?
I know. Tyler, when we upgraded his grade last year, that wasn't part of last year's budget. Came from Payroll adjustment, so we had to compensate for that. So that's where the majority.
And I think this is my last question. Vehicle registration, you know, I know you do because you get a report back of how much is done online. And is that growing? I thought they told me at the state level it was.
it grew in late 2020, and then last year was very much back to where it was. We also had another decline right now because of the software change created some holes in the data. So a lot of people that normally did it online would have to either call us to get us to fix it online or come in and do it in person. So yes, it's trending up, but it hasn't been huge over the last 2 years, but there's been a couple of interruptions, you know, why.
I think that'd be, and I know you track that, it's interesting to see that over a period of
Yeah,
time,
I can,
especially in the future.
I can do that. Their data collection from that website is still cumbersome. You gotta have to download each day and add them up by hand or put in a spreadsheet. But we
But
can
I-
definitely do that.
You know, if you do it
Yeah,
6 months and 6 months later before we meet, so we can see what's happening in the trend. When I talked to some people at motor vehicle, they said that they are busier with online.
Mhm.
And so that should decrease some of the work a little at some point.
At some point it should, yeah. All I know is people are still,
Sure.
they're having a hard time buying the new cars, I think is where that wobble is coming from, but they are getting creative in buying their used cars now. We're getting a lot more people that are buying them in New Hampshire or Arizona or on Carvana or places like that than we ever have. And they have to come in and see us, usually because they have oddball situations.
Thank you.
Kathy, this one here, workers' comp significantly down, whereas most everyone else might have had a small drop, but most others went up.
Yeah, that was my allocation last year, wasn't very good.
Oh, okay,
When I did it.
okay, that's true. And then the last, what's other employee benefits?
That's the sick buy.
Oh, okay.
If we say that it's sick pay instead of other employee benefits, sick pay, buyback, sick pay, if you work, if you're not out, of course, shouldn't it say that instead of other employee benefits?
That's, I mean, if you want me to change it, sure.
Does it include anything else other than that?
No.
The chart of accounts, when we went to Munis, had all these labels when we had Trio long before. So these are names. We've cleaned up a lot of it last couple of years, but this is one that's just stuck. So we can change it.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. So the part-time though doesn't have a 3% pay increase where everyone else. So are we doing,
Everyone has a.
Are you talking about?
Everyone has a 3%. Remember, last year, the wages are based off of 53 weeks.
oh, so it's gonna be everywhere, I guess. All right, sorry.
So everywhere the wages, except for select board, is 3%. Any questions for Ed? No? Okay.
Thank you all. Have a lovely week.
There you go.
So this one should be pretty simple, very straightforward. Everyone on this is the same as last year, except for my seasonal data collection requests. Haven't been busy for the last couple of years, really because of COVID. Since we haven't been, I've reduced that request by $6,500 this year. Hopefully I'll get to use some of it this summer. And if I start bouncing off the cap, then I'll ask for more in future years, but rather than putting it there and not using it, I did reduce the request this year.
I appreciate that.
Every other line on this is pretty much flat for over a decade. So that's it for this slide. Most of these other slides are just informational stuff that give you guys for information purposes each year. You can see that our total values continue to trend upwards. That column next year will be even higher. Market is continuing to just climb at unbelievable rates. Yeah, frankly, stupid rates. I pushed values this year, which got us close to somewhere in the neighborhood of 93, 95% on market value. But based on sales that are coming in, by the time I committed taxes, that was using sales up to April 1st, because that's the state mandated assessment date.
Right.
By the time I started processing all the stuff through the summertime, we're probably back down at 80, 85% or less. So that number will get bigger again. Next slide. Again, just information, tax rate history, so you can see over time where we've really been on our percentage of spending of total value of town versus what you're spending to operate the town. So in the strictest sense, tax rate can really be looked at as a percentage of your overall value in town that you're spending to operate the town. So there's your trend going back to 2002. I know I didn't fit it on here because you didn't read anything, but at one point I had looked at all the way back to the last digital files I could find before digging through the books downstairs. All the way back into 1992, your average over time is really at about 18%. Yes.
I want to go back to the capital. You're assessing your estimate of about 400,000 to do a professional assessment, right?
Sure.
And it's currently at 128 and you're only adding 15. That tells me that you're going to be way short in 5 years.
Yep.
So should we be looking at like 60,000 a year after this to try to get it up to the 400?
It's one of those things where that number has really been in place since 2008, the very first year after the last reval.
So that might be low.
It could be low, but it also could, again, when we need it, it's kind of a moving target. As long as I can keep us at close to 5% and quality rating, meaning bitch through the quality rating is if you look at everything as a bell curve, quality rating measures how many of our data points are outside that curve, how much noise there is in the assessments. So as long as I can keep a good quality rating, meaning we're pretty equitable on our assessments and the market's okay, there's really nothing that forces us to have a reval. So kind of a moving target. So I haven't asked for a lot every year because it might be in 2 years, it might be in 10.
So what happens if in 2 years it's determined we have to do one?
Part
Where
of,
does the funding come from?
part of this whole process is to, like, in our options that we presented, is to get the debt service down to free up some money that can be spent towards these purchases. What we've done too with our capital assets, equipment and vehicles is, the police will generally be kind of steady, one car, 1 year to the next, all the way through. With our larger pieces of equipment, we're gonna have a gap of a few years where we don't need to So after talking to Justin and see where we are with potentially getting a company to come out and do an appraisal, how much money we have, let's say in a year or two, we'll have money just allocated towards a revamp.
Without affecting the tax rate, is what you're saying.
Yeah, because by paying off that debt service, it'll free up at least 2 years from now, 3 years from now.
Derek had proposed potentially using part of the surplus this year to put a little more away from that, but that was when I basically told her that because the market has gone so crazy, most towns don't make minor adjustments each year. So a lot of towns have run into the position where they're down to 50% of market value and they're in crisis mode to have to get revals done in the next year or two, which means that the reval companies, for a town our size, is a very small list that would ever actually respond to an RFP for us. So they're probably not available even if we went up to bid tomorrow.
Justin, I know you must be in forecasting in the assessing world. And there is, real estate is like a rubber band. It's stretched so far, and then it's gonna snap back. I don't see a deflation of real estate, but there's some talk on the state level or recession. And if that happens, it slows the market down. What, any forecasting from you or just from what you've heard?
I would have expected it when the pandemic hit in 2020,
Yeah.
and it was the exact opposite. So I won't speculate.
Thank you.
All I could say to you on that is that when we had the burst in 08-10, we saw very small declines in our actual selling prices around here.
Right.
We really didn't see any impact until more like 2012.
But you didn't see the increase either into a way most.
We saw very small declines. It mostly
Right.
plateaued. It wasn't really a catastrophic cliff.
That's right.
Matt, can you mention that right? 91.
Yeah.
2010.
So
Right.
Who determines that that you're being forced to do an evaluation? Is that the state? or-
So the state strongly recommends they can't actually force you, but once you get below 70% ratio, they can start doing minor clawbacks on reducing some things on reimbursements for homestead and veteran exemptions and tree growth.
And it's the
So-
state's review of that that determines whether or not you.
So your local assessments are reviewed annually by an auditor from Maine Revenue Services, and the results from that audit. So even if one example is there's a community, Halmo, I think it was, they're down to like 30% of market value the last time it was, but they just never vote to change it because the reimbursement that the state can deduct them from is so minuscule that their cost of reval far outweighs what they're losing. So they have to keep going that way. We got that far down, which I hope to not let us go. The impacts to our reimbursements could be more significant. But from an equity standpoint, you don't want to be that low because that's on average.
Now, following up on what Ruth was saying, okay, the market tanks, and you're saying right now, you're at 93%. The property values tank and they drop.
I'll reduce them. That's what the sale prices are showing. I've done it twice in the time of bank. There weren't big changes, but they were reduced. However, that's just the tax rate's going to go up. You know, the tax rate is your spending divided by total value. So it's a result. So really what, if your spending stayed steady or decreased, the value changes what the tax rate is to collect the same amount of tax that you would have been otherwise.
My 20 questions, sorry about this.
It's okay.
Okay,
That's
so
why I'm
saying,
here.
so saying it drops and you were at 80% and it drops so that now the value is like 95%, even though you haven't changed the assessment. Is that something that you would do if that happened? I mean, just leave it if it's.
If we're relatively close to 100% on average, I'd leave it.
Okay.
The goal is to keep us, we'd like to be within 10% of 100%,
Okay.
either way, either above or below.
Okay.
Reason being, it impacts what we actually get for reimbursement on homestead and bed. I have to apply the same percentage to our exemptions as what I'm certified myself. So if we're only at 70% of market value, I have to decrease the homestead reimbursements by 70% as well. So I have to bring them down to, I have to reduce them by 30% to get them down to being 70%. which then in turn reduces what we get back from the state on the partial reimbursements of that value that's lost.
Thank you. No more questions.
Good job, Justin. Always.
Let me be applauded, do a good job.
Thank you.
Very steady with it.
Yeah, we're glad you came back.
Me too. So I think we pretty much already covered this. This is, just market value adjustment. This is hybrid and commercial appraisal. I should really probably just change this label to being commercial appraisals in general. Our big box stores, the mall pieces, stuff that I really wouldn't have local market data to rely on if they're challenged on the value, we need to make adjustments. Those that go up for commercial appraisal, they tend to be a few. There's a few appraisals out there that specialize in that kind of thing, but they tend to be very expensive.
So
The last hybrid appraisal we did, $7,500.
So something like Market Basket coming in, you've got to bring someone in to establish, would be my guess.
Market basket comes in, we probably use the same kind of agreements with most businesses we already have.
Okay,
Although it would be higher, it's door construction. Probably, but there might be smaller square footage. But if they challenged what we came at, then this would be the fund that I would seek for outside help
Okay.
to defend that assessment in subsequent appeals.
because it just started wondering is if it could be if it was a cost, but if this is the defense fund, but I was wondering if we could find a way to get them to pay for their own initial valuation.
Unfortunately, under Maine law, you have to establish it, but your assessment's presumed valid. But then when they appeal, it costs them nothing to appeal. But they have a pretty high burden to overcome because the assessment is presumed valid unless they show compelling evidence that you're just way out of left field. So as long as your numbers are reasonable, you're usually pretty safe. But the big ones can be a significant annual tax bill. So, so this is something that we're funding it, so it's there if we need it. But I don't expend it unless we actually utilize it.
Unless Justin says otherwise, we went over the budget. We haven't put $1,500 in this year or last year because we have a sufficient balance right now.
It's 15,000.
It's close to 15,000.
So in theory, that's enough for 2 appraisals. We're really desperate. I'm sure we can come up with it somewhere. So
Traditionally, when one falls, do the rest jump in line to start doing the same?
it can be sometimes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Target, not Walmart.
Right, right.
Target's a very good corporate citizen. They don't appeal constantly. There are some significant commercial entities out there that just do it out of habit because there's absolutely zero cost to them to do it. That's it for me, unless you guys had any other general questions. I think Eric asked me to speak maybe a little bit of homestead embedding reimbursements. The numbers in the budget are based on the count of those currently have on file. Eddie's based on what we had last year, but that's been a pretty flat trend. Accounts come, new accounts come in, old accounts retire. That's a pretty steady level for us for reimbursement on that. I wouldn't expect it to change much. Homesteads, same thing. We add and remove a lot each year, but they pretty much balance out. There's not a lot of difference. There's no change in the amount of the exemptions from the state legislature for the current year. They may change in future years, but at least for the coming fiscal year, there's no change. And our reimbursement is based on a portion of the value that's offset by those. So that's pretty stable as well.
Just maybe you can describe to the group definition of overlay. He's coming up.
Sure. So overlay,
You'll see overlay, Department 30. Intergovernmental tax assessments, but you don't really have to go there. We just plugged in $150,000 as a placeholder.
it's essentially,
Reimbursement.
well, it serves a couple of purposes. We add it to the warrant and authorization to use it to pay for abatements. So if you come to me and tell me, hey, you're listing me as 3 bathrooms, I only have 2. That's something I'm going to abate on. It's factual. It's not an argument thing. If there's an error in the records, we'll fix it. So there's some amount of money that we might lose from what we were planning for re-raising always perfect. We do our best. The other thing it covers us on is, frankly, it helps us get through. We meant budget X amount, but if people don't pay on time, those delinquent funds that are coming in, if you didn't have it, you'd have shortfalls to make up. Abatement covers that a little bit. It covers the gap. It's basically mandated by statute that you're allowed to essentially go above and beyond what your commitment is, up to 5% of that commitment. $150,000 is 0.03%. It's significantly less than 1%. I mean, that overlay could be $1.5 million based on our budget. We never touch that. So the 150 is a safe position. We generally don't go anywhere near using all of that. Those are running the surplus that we're going to bring forward the next year. So it's almost self-sustaining, but it shows as a separate calculation. And it's literally at the end of the day. We have odd numbers and stuff, rounding up pennies when you have 4,000 accounts. That can be a significant number. Overlay also allows you to have a budgeting mechanism where you're calculating the tax rate, so you're not like to the penny. So that's where it comes from. It can be up to 5%. We do significantly less than that. Is that clear or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Clear.
I know this 53-week is kicking my ass. Is the 3%?
There's a problem in this department.
Okay.
Just American knows it. We talked about it already.
The
There was a
negative.
miscalculation a while back. Actually, it's more of a
Oh, it's
personal contract issue.
So, all right,
But yes, I know what you're looking at, and it's good.
all right.
This is good number.
I saw it too, and I'm not panicking.
Did you have it over with?
But it's not mine. All right, there's no other questions. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank
Jesse.
you.
Good night.
Facilities, I'll cover this real quick. Okay, I'll talk about the first line. Full-time payroll, you see an increase there. Annette is our custodial services person here. And for years, a portion of her budget was within this particular department and a portion was within the library department. What we did was take her 12.5 hours that was portioned to the library and brought them back into this department. So that's the change that you see in full-time wages. The same change will be reflected in the library department when they, you'll see that's deduction out of that if it's in here. Part-time payroll. With that part-time line last year, we budgeted for 40 hours for part-time work. We didn't know how we were going to divide that up. We were thinking about maybe 2 positions or multiple positions to make up the 40 hours. The reason why we did that is because we had lack of custodial, actually almost non-existent at most of our buildings. The only one that was being serviced full-time was this particular building, town hall, and the library at part-time. The public safety building was not being kept up, and public works didn't have anybody. So we hired a fine gentleman who's not only dedicated but passionate about his job. He's been working about a half a year over at the public safety building. He's done a great job, and goes down to public works. Just share a story with you. Some of you heard it for Christmas. He only been here for a few months. Public works, all the guys chipped in and bought him a gift card for Christmas. We did the same thing here. So he's really working out. What we tried to do is make sure that because we didn't know what was needed. Did we need more custodial service or maybe more of the maintenance side? What we found is he's done such a great job with custodial, and since Mike has left, Mark and I have taken over the maintenance responsibilities and through the contracts that we have and the PM agreements. So with that being said, we didn't feel the need that we had to hire an additional maintenance person right now or custodial because the job is getting done. However, with the increases and other things, what we did was apportion some of the 20 hours that was not used into the cost increases with the other lines here, with just a portion of it. So that explains the full-time and part-time. Utilities, as mentioned earlier, the majority of this budget, I think a little over 85% of it is an increase in utilities. Contracted services went up. There were several services that in different departments that were being funded in lines that it probably shouldn't have been funded in. We brought them all into central services. And then, as mentioned earlier in the budget overview, there's been significant, I shouldn't say significant for one company, but increases across the board just because of inflation. I've talked to most of them, and it's all the same answer. Their wage increases, the cost of products just get put into this. What has not gone up is our HVAC and our roofing agreements, because 2 years ago, we signed a 3-year agreement to lock in the prices. So next year could be a different story. Everything else is basically flat. Uniform acquisition, we added about $100 because we have Daniel now doing some of the work that needs uniforms. Any questions?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Something for this year, and I'm sure there's a really simple explanation to this. I'm just missing, but the electricity usage at the dump. What does that compare to the town hall? You know, off the top of your head?
Yeah. Well, I could just go with price. I mean, last year, solid waste budgeted $3,500 for electricity. We didn't increase them at all because they probably weren't spending as much. Also, a lot of the energy credits. He hasn't had a bill.
Oh, for a while, yeah.
Yeah, so the energy credits helped, and some of that was a portion of one account, so that's for his account. So that's why they remain flat. Plus, I think they were over budgeting just a bit. When we were taking a look at actuals, and maybe they just decided not to use as much electricity. So that's 3,500, and facilities is going to be about 65,000 this year.
That's for solar panels on my roof. Huh? Goodness.
I'd say that Kathy's done a lot of work with the electricity, just looking at usage and hours, and we just applied it. So.
Aside, solar panels on the roof. When you get around to having to replace the roof, isn't the cost of doing that considerably more because all those have to be taken off?
Well,
Back?
that's somewhat true. So I was in Brunswick when Revision was looking to put solar panels on the recreation center. They wanted to put solar panels on the roof that was only had 5 years of life remaining. So it really didn't make sense to do that, right? So there is a cost associated with that. So if you're gonna put panels on a roof, I'd probably, if I had to, I'd probably do them when I get a new roof.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Good evening, everybody. Planning office, just a bit of a reminder of who we are, what we do. You'll be getting this, I suppose. I thought everybody would see this earlier, but we'll see these slides coming to you. One thing to note here, basically customer service and planning development and codes all in one office up there. On here, you see that we have a new assistant planner coming on board. We also, Andrew DC was here until December of this past year. So we anticipate that. We are assisting all of the boards and committees that deal with planning and development in town. go through that exhaustive list right now, but we can go on to the next slide. These slides are just trying to show this is Department 7 codes and kind of the trend lines of expenditures up and down this. I think that 2021 spike is associated with a laptop that was purchased for Tom Lister. I think that, and then we kind of redid that of where that money comes out of now, so. Anyway, moving on. Revenues, this is interesting. Codes had a big spike in 1819 and it's leveling off on, that's electrical, plumbing, and building permits. Interestingly enough, as you see the permits associated with the planning side, that might tell a story of forecasting. So we can keep moving on slides here. So this is getting into expenditures for the planning office, crew staff payroll that, and then minor expenses for items like that. Advertising. Oh, yeah, that's fine. So here shows the all planning permits revenues. Go to the next slide, we get into site plan breakdown of site plan application fees that come in per year. And then the next subdivision, that's showing an increase. So that's kind of telling of what we all may know. Actually, we saw the kind of uptick in site plan over the past couple of years. That's true with this year as well. Subdivision still is going up. So housing is coming, and Tom is going to be busy with permitting a lot of houses.
When you say going, what are we talking the numbers?
That graph is, not
Right,
much. But let's see, I didn't prepare it for tonight, but I did do a breakdown over the past year of what was permitted.
Just a guess. I'm not.
Well, permitted and built is different. So one way that I typically track is with Justin, because he assesses on square footage. And there's a lag time of when a permit gets issued and things actually get assessed for value. It's actually quite a bit, a year and a half at least.
Yeah.
So this past year, with Highland Green, that kind of skews things quite a bit all the time. The previous year, so going back 2 years, the Mountain Road and the apartments that were associated with that. This past year, they came in and did more cottages off of Evergreen, as well as the assisted living off Audit. And then we anticipate more development coming to us this year with Highland Green on a different, something that they're maybe proposing as well.
So the majority's in Highland Green. We're not talking.
The majority is in
Okay.
Highland Green.
I was thinking when you were talking the subdivision expansion elsewhere, but
It's minor bits and pieces elsewhere.
Yeah.
But the bulk is Highland Green. Mallet Woods has been a busy one as well.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no other major,
okay. I
but
was thinking that's-
oddly enough, time it takes to review things, and Roland may know this, it can be sensitive to, but something like home place takes as much time as the Highland Ring to get through the review process.
Hmm.
Due to the complexity of the situation, context of what's happening, so. But we don't need to go there. I'm taking the planning night off to talk about it. Getting into Department 25. For questions on planning and codes, but I'll take those now.
I'll just add those for insurance benefits under planning. There's an example of what I mentioned before about health benefits. The person coming in to replace Andrew has a completely different family scenario. So that's why we have to look at that.
I was expecting more of a savings. How long was Andrew here? So he probably
Andrew
been-
was here for about 2 years.
So he was further up the chart,
He's further.
and now we're bringing in, I expected more
Right,
payroll savings.
so this person will be coming in at a lower step with a family plan.
Right, but family plan isn't on the table. I expected, I guess, a greater savings.
COLA is included.
I don't, we didn't really know what the person's salary was when we put this
All
together.
right, we always budget at the lowest position, the lowest step on the grade scale,
Is that where they are?
one step above. Just take on a higher degree. And there's-
Should you really go with the lowest? It seems like well with it.
Well, with this budget, we kind of knew what we were doing.
Right, but I'm just saying as a rule.
Well, we have a line,
It's very experienced, right?
well, we could, if it was a department head, probably. But for everybody else, I just assume the interest because we have a line that we can draw from if we have to. It's
I'm just thinking because people are basically quitting because people are throwing money like crazy out to try and hire people, so it's. more competitive.
because I think what we have to do then, we're in negotiations, so I'm not saying too much here.
Mm.
But, part of it is make sure that our wages are competitive. That's really key.
So we're still negotiating this, so this could change.
This could change.
Okay,
All
all right.
I'll say here for the group is negotiations.
Yeah.
Well, it shouldn't impact this budget.
Well said. I'll keep going. So contracted services, there's the line item here for the 50. This is fairly consistent year to year. Past 2 years of fiscal years have funded the comprehensive plan implementation of the recode effort that's happening now. In my department overview, I should emphasize that. That's a busy topic right now. What I'm anticipating, and the reason it's in this budget, out of that 50 is 20 on a 2-year cycle to look at everything outside of the recode. And I'm thinking this is going to be fiscal years 23, 24 to have something complete by 25. So I'm not that far out of planning and implementing our comp plan. That's 6 years since it's passed. And it's kind of a big portion of what needs to happen. Part of implementing the comp plan, this is deja vu for me. I was here from the 2005 comp plan when we did this, and these updates, keep shifting away and times change. And a big portion of that 20 is natural resource mapping updates, basically the natural areas plan, re-looking at that, re-engaging the public on that whole process all over again. I was criticized, not by anybody here, I don't think, but at some public meetings about the recode effort not doing that. Recode is something taking on a heavy lift downtown here, but we're really not addressing the natural resource rural area. So that's what that's all about. I have 20 more bullet items to talk about it if you want me to keep going, otherwise we'll keep moving. The capital project engineering, this actually is coming, is this targeted for engineering on Pleasant Point, I believe. That's, yeah, so there's kind of preliminary or engineering so that we can go for grant funds to shore up Pleasant Point Road.
Is it where
Well, it's I think Dennis can speak to that far better than I, but it's on the list of kind of red flag priorities that
Okay,
if we ignore it, then something
I've been there for a while.
might be
so-
pie in the face if something happens. So I think it's just a rising preparation.
So Dennis has talked to an engineer and they're in work on what we do for engineering designs, some consultant type stuff. And, hopefully we can look for some grants and start funding this project, not this fiscal year, but the next 2.
And the last bullet, grant matching, I always have about 5,000. It enables us to do the kind of low hanging fruit grants, whether that's project canopy, certified local government, historic district grants, the boat launch one we're doing now, the coastal community stuff, all of these state aid grants that come out. It's nice to have a little bit of cash match component. And on an annual basis, I know that those exist, I just don't know which ones are a project.
Okay, I'll just finish off this particular department of contractual services. Legal. When I came into the position as town manager, we had upped the legal fees from 40,000 to 50,000. We had negotiations going on at the time and had no idea what would happen. So we went to $50,000. We've been far from that, at least this year, on actual usage. Basically, this past year, we spent it on the purchase power agreement, personnel, COVID-19, discussions with our attorneys on some of the policies or lack of policies that came about. The Topsham Housing Authority, although they reimbursed us for all the legal fees, we were there at least to pay, they reimbursed us for it. Associated with that, any TIF type discussions, we use our TIF attorney to make sure we understand what we're getting into or what we're looking at, make sure we have a good opinion. Town meeting, of course, you've seen town attorney at town meeting, and if any questions came up with any ordinances or anything else, and a bunch of other smaller things. This year, coming up anticipated, we have union negotiations, charter commission. We're going to need some legal services to pay some debt service, and the recode effort, there could be some potential attorney fees there, and typical personnel matters or any other things that just pop up. Charter commission, of the $50,000 that we do, I just took 5,000 out and dedicated that to the charter commission. In the event that we have to go to legal fees if this continues, just at least dedicated for them, there could be some advertising here, consultant work, whatever it is. Of course, because hopefully nothing happens and we use up our legal budget, but there might be some other funds in there as well. The audit, last year we budgeted for an amount, and I think Dave, you amended that at town meeting to increase 32,000. And last year we fortunately didn't have to do a single audit. However, this year coming in, we have to do a single audit. So the audit is 25,000. A single audit is going to be about 10. So that's why you see the increase there, 35,000. And the Coastal Humane Society, they have quite a bit of turnover there. So every year, I like the numbers before we start doing the budget. I called and found that there was an increase. And the increase from their standpoint was due to the new census data that's out, an increase in population. And I know that they built a new facility, so I'm sure debt service is in there somewhere. And that finishes off Department 25. Topsham Community Fund. Again, we don't have anything in there. We haven't met. No. So I know last year we said we were going to talk about it, but I can talk to you offline about that.
Still an amount sitting in a fund for that. Though. There's still an amount
There is.
in that fund.
It's in our code, so we've been budgeting from this year. It's not a problem, but still exists in our code. We have to do those monies. Economic and community development. I've chat it, not be here, so I'll be for 10 minutes. At least recently, our economic development director has been lead staff support for TDI. Over the past half year, I've been attending and doing other things as well, and Mark's gotten involved. Regionally, our director has been directing and part of the executive committee for McEd, of course, the Chamber of Commerce, and is vice chair and staff representative for Korea and here on that as well. This past year, the direction from the board and administration, economic development is to re-strengthen our relationships with the local business community. That's been the direction. This past year, we had the first annual Top Small Business Expo, which I alluded to earlier, and we're making that a bigger event this year. And you'll hear from Pamela Duke when she does her presentation that she'll be a part of it as well. Just providing some other things in there to make it more attractive for citizens to come to this. Connections to the website I mentioned earlier with our featured business on the website, as well as the business directory. We're looking to get more of a social media outreach to local businesses to connect with the community. Of course, we have the crier that I mentioned earlier. I'm working with the staff with the crier to see how we can pull all of Topsham businesses in with what we're doing, kind of in the section on it.
The business of the month, is that something they apply for?
No.
No.
No, so what we had is, it's been a little slow for various reasons. John hasn't been here. What we have done is interviewed a few businesses. Our intern helped us, at least get us to the first few months. We write up an article, write up an article about the business, a little bit about the owner, management, or staff, what the business provides, and we'll feature them on our website, which you can see if you go to our business directory. What we'll eventually do is, once we get a little better at making sure that we're timely and get them featured in the normal continuous basis, we'll make sure that we have something prior with a QR code that will bring them right to the business directory so we can see that. And TDI, of course, has been much more proactive. I think this year they missed their last meeting, but again, they came to the board with a presentation to do a market survey in the Topsham Fair Mall area. They're engaged, they want to do well. There's some other things that they talked about, how to bring more commercial tax base to the area. So those are be the focus areas, I think, for economic development in this next year. And just to remind you that everything within the economic development is TIF sheltered under the interchange TIF. And so those monies that are not being used go back into that reserve for appropriate expenditures within that district. And that's it for John.
Wait a minute. That was nowhere near long enough.
I cut 5 slides out.
Yeah, I know.
John says I wish to be very good here.
So that's it. Till tomorrow.
That's it. So tomorrow we got 4 big departments. Public Works, Solid Waste, Police and Fire. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Tom.
Oh,